Good evening.
Good evening.
This is meant to be a practical experience tonight. An experience that is meant to give us a practical way of life or principle of life if we can remember that in every experience we must bring this to conscious remembrance. I'm going to start out by telling you that the religious and mythological literature of the world has a theme that runs through it that is not too greatly understood and sometimes taken lightly. In the religious literature, I refer to a statement of the Masters, "The Father within me doeth the works," or of Paul's, "I can do all things through Christ, which dwelleth in me." Or in the Hebrew texts, "There is a spirit in man." And in much of the religious literature of the world, the subject of angels or a presence. All of these things refer to just one thing, and it makes no difference whether you find this in the Hebrew religion, the Christian, the Buddhist, or any other. It all refers to one thing, and that is that there is a something greater than our human capacities, our human understanding, something beyond our human understanding, which at some time or other plays a very good part in our experience and in the lives of those the spiritually illumined. It performs a permanent experience of good. For instance, when Elijah was banished and was living in the wilderness, hunted, he found that when it was time to eat, he was fed. One time a poor widow shared with him. Another time he awakened to find cakes baking on a stone in front of him. At another time ravens brought food. In other words, what this is trying to tell us is that the spiritual nature of Elijah, the spiritual presence, the Messiah, the Christ, the Spirit of God in man, whatever you want to call it, that in his moments of need cared for him, gave him the protection, the food, safety from his enemies, hiding places. In the experience of Moses, we find that whatever the spiritual experience was that Moses had on the mountaintop, that later, when he was leading the Hebrews out of Egypt, that when he needed it, there was a cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night, that surrounded him and his people and protected them from the enemy. That manna fell from the sky. The Red Sea opened, whether as a literal experience or symbolic makes no difference. It was an experience in which something of a more than human nature performed this miracle of safety, security, feeding. So you can go through the religious literature of the world in any and every mystical teaching, and you will discover that something of a miraculous nature was always present in time of need. Eventually, there built up a religious teaching that gave us not only the promise of this presence of something divine, but there sprung up also another presence, the devil, Satan, evil, the angel of death, so that there were good influences in the lives of those who were entitled to the good, and there were evil influences in the experience of those who were entitled to some evil. This idea of what you might call the supernatural was extended into the literature of mythology. And here is where you perhaps find angels as much as you do in the religious world, but you find another group as well. In Hawaiian mythology you have the Menehunis, who were always out doing some good things for the people that they humanly could not have done for themselves. And the Irish have their little Irish Menehunis. The Norwegians, the Nordics, all have their angels of one kind or another. And you find in the folk literature of ancients always this something or other that is a protective influence in the experience of the pioneers of the early people. Now, this has never, so far as I know, been explained to the people of the world. The secret seems to remain in the unexplained religious and mythological teachings. But we come to another wider phase of this, and I'm going to illustrate it in just one instance so as to give you an idea of the entire subject. Richard Wagner, in his opera Parsifal, seemingly has an entire cast of characters. One of these is an old man who has lived a very good, pure life as the keeper of the Holy Grail, the golden cup, the chalice. And he has done his work nobly and well and protected it from theft and harm. But he has a son who takes over from him when he retires, and this son is not so conscientious and permits the Holy Grail to be stolen. Also, it turns out he's not quite as pure as his father, and the first thing you know, he is associating with a woman of low morals. And he goes from one fix to another, always with evil companions and so forth, and misfortunes. But lo and behold, he has a son. And this son is as pure as his grandfather. And he restores the stolen Holy Grail and becomes its faithful guardian. This is just a brief summary of some main points, because what Wagner is telling us is this: there is only one character in his entire opera, just one man. And that man, in his original state of purity, this is the grandfather, is the embodiment of the qualities of good, purity, wholeness, wholesomeness. But he also embodies within himself the potentiality of dropping from his pure estate to ordinary humanhood, a combination of good and evil, and he does so, and this is his own son. In other words, this is another facet of his own nature. Elsewhere, you have that as the first Adam in the Garden of Eden, and then the Adam who has been cast out of the Garden of Eden because he did not maintain his purity. And then you find, in spite of the fact of the human impossibility of it, he has two sons who fight each other with qualities of good and evil, all of which also is to bring forth the fact that this one man Adam, the first Adam and the last Adam, are the same Adam in different states of consciousness. Now, in Parsifal, as soon as the human qualities appear, you have not only the carelessness that results in the theft of the Holy Grail, you have not only the individual untrue to his trust, but then you have him even sinking lower and associating with people of low character, designated in this opera as an immoral woman. Now, the old man has the potentiality of becoming the human and does so. But you see, the human, with all of his failings, has the potentiality of becoming pure again. And here you have the story of the prodigal, the son of the king, the son of the Most High, and then the prodigal who wanders out and gets to the lower steps, and then returns to his father's house. See how many different ways, in different forms of literature, the lesson is being revealed to us, that we, in our own consciousness, embody this entire world, all of its good and all of its evil, and we outpicture it as if it were you and me, and he and she, instead of realizing that our experiences are all the externalization of the state of consciousness to which we have lent ourselves at a given moment. We may have started out as the very finest of children, and then become the most wicked of men or women, and then become the very finest of men and women again, because always we were not in the world is in us. And we are externalizing in our lives our own states of consciousness. We embody within ourselves the angel, the Menahuni, the Christ, the Spirit of God. We also embody within ourselves the angel of death, of superstition, of ignorance, of fear. The Master is all off by himself, alone. And then all of a sudden, the devil appears before him. But you see, there was no devil there. He was alone in the wilderness. And the devil is an externalization of his own state of consciousness. It's what he is projecting, and he's not being tempted from outside. He's being tempted from inside. There may be 100,000 bank tellers in the country, and probably 5 of them are being tempted by the money in front of them, and none of the rest of them. But that sort of, to me, would indicate that it isn't the money that's tempting anyone. The temptation is from within. Of course, we are always projecting it, and we are saying, he tempted me, she tempted me, it tempted me. When you come to spiritual maturity, you realize how nonsensical that is. That nothing and no one has the power to tempt except whatever our own weakness may be. And in that direction, we fall. Or we put up a fight. And we're fighting the devil, or we're fighting Satan, or we're fighting, in this modern day, we don't say devil or Satan, we just say temptation. You see, no one really has dominion in his own life until he comes to an understanding of the fact that he embraces within his own consciousness all that he is to externalize in his experience. There is the story told of a man getting on a train at a certain stop and seating himself beside a minister in the train. And as they came near to the next station, it was evident the minister was going to get off, and the man said, "Oh, do you live here in this town?" "Yes, I do." "Well, I'm thinking of coming here to live. What kind of a town is this? What kind of people do you have here?" The minister looked at him and said, "Why, What kind of people do you have in the town that you have lived in? Oh, he said, they're mean, they're bad, they're ugly. That's just exactly what you're going to meet in this town. Of course, you're bringing them here. You're bringing them here. You can't find in this town anything that you don't bring here. If you are to find love, you must bring love. If you are to find friendship, you must bring friendship. If you are to find honesty, you must bring the honesty. It isn't here, it isn't out in the air. It isn't in the air in this room or out on the street or in the building. Whatever qualities there are, these qualities are to be found in consciousness, your consciousness or mine. Success, well, of course there are some people going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and start to get on the job for their success, and others are going to wait till 8 or 9. But whether they get up at 6 or whether they get up at 9, nothing outside of them is making them do it either way. They are being prompted from within. Now, the reason for this that I'm telling you is that it leads back to the original revelation of this message, and that is the word consciousness. I embody in my consciousness infinity. Without knowing this, I lay myself open to being the victim of thoughts, ideas that I may pick up out of the atmosphere. Actually, not out of the atmosphere, but out of consciousness. This you see clearly once you perceive that there is only one universal mind of man. In other words, the same qualities that prompt Americans in their human life are the same qualities that prompt Englishmen or Germans or Frenchmen. Humanly, we are all alike. I don't mean that every individual is like every other individual, but I mean that every race is like every other race in that they are prompted by the same motives. In the human experience, it begins with self-preservation. As you go higher in the human scale, it takes on charity, brotherly love, benevolence, sharing. But the qualities of greed, animality, lust, hate, envy, jealousy, and the qualities of friendship, sharing, brotherly love, benevolence, equality, justice, these same qualities are to be found in humans throughout the world. One human may have more of one than another, but in the races you'll find them all. And the reason is there is only one universal mind of man. Now, because the world has been in ignorance, it doesn't know that we can pick up anything that is in that universal mind and be influenced by it without knowing it. The very first time that I was able to give you the positive proof of it was when we had the problem of subliminal advertising. You remember it? Now, that was a very, very tough experience to go through, but it was a very illuminating one because it enabled me for the first time to be able to prove that this is true, that there is one universal mind and that we can be influenced by it without even knowing that we are being influenced by it or that it is being projected at us. In this experiment, as you know, the attempt was made to sell products to you without letting you know that the advertising was being directed at you. You couldn't see it or hear it or taste it or touch it or smell it, and yet you jumped up out of your chair and went out and acted on it. Now, this is exactly what I mean by the influences that govern our human experience. A man is tempted to steal and in his ignorance thinks that he is a thief, whereas this is actually being directed at him. Another man is tempted sensually, another man is tempted in some other way, but always it isn't the man, it is a subliminal activity of that universal mind projecting itself and to which we respond without even knowing that we are being hypnotized. Now, in the case of the subliminal advertising, the hypnotizing is being done by those individuals who are responsible for projecting it. But in this that I'm speaking of, it is not being projected from any personal standpoint or by any individual or group of individuals, but it is an activity of the universal mind projecting itself, and we respond at whatever level our temptation may be. The moment that you perceive that there is a universal mind that is projecting these, well, let's call them traits or qualities, envy, jealousy, malice, greed, lust, false ambition. The moment you know that there is a universal mind projecting these, you can protect yourself by turning it off in the same way that you would switch off your telephone. You can just disconnect yourself from it in the recognition of it as what Paul called the carnal mind. In other words, this carnal mind, or the universal human mind, is not a power in the sense that it is God ordained, that it has a law behind it. Actually, it operates much in the same way. Here we have another illustration. It operates much in the same way as the medical belief operated for decades, that said sitting in a draft or getting your feet wet would give you a cold. Now this operated as if it were a law, and people actually sat in a draft and got cold, and they actually got their feet wet and got cold. Whereas sitting in a draft or getting your feet wet is absolutely an impossibility as a cause of cold. I had the pleasure of teaching that to a doctor in 1935 and then witnessing it in 1963 become accepted by the materia medica profession. Now actually, though, it did operate to give many people colds, yet it had no such power. Its only power was the power of universal acceptance. Probably within 10 years from now, no one will ever again catch cold from sitting in a draft or getting their feet wet, because authority has removed the power from it and said, oh, it's ridiculous, it cannot be. Now, this is not the first experience of that kind in materia medica. 50 years ago, the medical textbooks on health, on mental diseases, gave two principal causes for the filled mental institutes. And there was only one reason that women occupied mental institutes, and that was menopause. That had all of the mental institutes filled with women. Now, there are no more women there because of that, because it has been discovered that menopause is not menopause, what is it? Is it menopause yet? Menopause. Menopause is not the cause of insanity. This is a medical law today, and because it's a medical law today, we no longer have women in mental institutes through menopause. In other words, the belief operating in the universal mind really operated as a law, as long as people were ignorant of the fact that it wasn't a law. Now that they know it isn't a law, it doesn't operate anymore. So, individually, anyone who comes to the realization that the operation of this universal mind of man is not a law and does not function as law, begins to set them free from its operation, and bit by bit it begins to disappear, because an externalized condition is maintained by the belief that is supporting it. Remove the belief that is supporting it and you have no more externalized condition. It is like a picture on the screen. Remove your film and you have no more picture on the screen. Remove the picture from mind, that is the picture of law, and you immediately begin to lose the externalized picture. So it is then that the moment that you realize that from a human standpoint that you are an antenna for the universal human mind or carnal mind, and take dominion by understanding that all of these so-called laws that no longer operate as law, that these laws are not law, and you begin to nullify them in your experience. When they tried subliminal advertising, the first results were as good as 60 to 70%, 55%, 54%. In other words, flash, and all of a sudden, more than half of you get up and walk out of the room and start to look for a bottle of Coca-Cola. None of you know why, but you did. And the reason was that this subliminal advertising was put to work in consciousness, and without you knowing it, you responded to it. Why doesn't it work today? See, before they got through with it, the final results were less than 0.5%. Why? Because of the work that was done to nullify its activity in consciousness. And the strange part was that they're pretty smart men. They put up $2 million for it, so you know they were smart. When it failed them the first time and they couldn't understand it, they waited 2 years to try it again. And then when they couldn't operate it the second time, they gave up. Then they scrapped all of their machinery and they disbanded the corporation. Now, you watch in your own life, if you will acknowledge that there is a carnal mind, that is, a universal mind of man, and that its functioning isn't law. And see how quickly you begin to nullify what you would first call the evil influences or sickly influences in your life. You'd be surprised how much healing work is accomplished just by nullifying the action of carnal mind, by knowing its nothingness, not fighting it, because remember, the moment you fight it, you would be acknowledging it as having law. But in your recognition of the fact that the only power that has law is that which comes from the infinite. Here you have quite another thing. Nobody has ever been able to nullify the law of love. Nobody has ever been able to nullify the law of truth. Nobody has ever been able to nullify the law of life. That all goes on and on and on because it has its basis in the infinite, in the omnipresence, omnipotence, omniscience. You never can destroy 2 times 2 is 4. You never can destroy H2O as water. You never can destroy anything that has the law of infinity behind it. You can never destroy the law of like begets like. When you plant apples, you just cannot get any other fruit than apples, and you can't get vegetables. It has to be apples. You cannot change that law. Yes, you can combine 2 fruits and get a combination of 2 fruits, but then you're proving the law of like begetting like, because whatever you put in has to come out. But you cannot nullify a law of life. You cannot nullify truth. You can't change truth. No matter what kind of mental manipulation you do, you cannot change truth. You can't alter it. You can't destroy it. And so you will discover then that in proportion as you consciously nullify the effects of the universal mind, you make yourself subject to infinity, that is, the divine consciousness. And then you are the antenna, the outlet, and the inlet to good. Emerson used the word mind for this because he used a literal translation of Sanskrit. Actually, the word he should have used would have been consciousness. He said there is only one mind, and every man is an inlet to and an outlet for that mind, and nothing but that mind. Now, had he meant the word mind, it would have left man hopeless, because mind is both good and evil, contains both good and evil. Therefore, man would always have been subject to both good and evil. But actually, man is both an inlet to and an outlet for the infinite, the divine consciousness, the life of the divine, the life which is divine, the love which is divine, the love which is infinite, omnipotence, omnipresence, omnipotence. And as you perceive this, and take, as for instance, in our contemplative meditation, where we'll close the eyes and then realize that We take our passage. I stand at the door and knock. I, God. All right, here we are. God, infinity, omnipotence, omnipresence, omniscience, right here at the entrance of my consciousness, and now I have to open myself to it consciously. Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth. I'm listening for the still small voice. I'm consciously opening myself as a state of receptivity to infinity, to the kingdom of God of which the Master spoke. Seek ye the kingdom of God, and remember that it's closer to you than breathing, nearer than hands and feet. It's standing at the door of your consciousness and knocking. The whole kingdom of God is, the whole kingdom of infinite good. And so, as you realize, I am the inlet to and the outlet for the divine, the infinite, the noble, so I am. And always, when I see or experience the temptation to believe in the good and evil of the human experience, I can close myself and realize, no, I am neither an inlet to nor an outlet for the carnal. For it has no law to maintain itself or sustain itself. It cannot operate in consciousness as a law because I have perceived what the Master said, thou couldst have no power over me unless it were given to thee of God. The Master wasn't speaking to a man, he was speaking to temporal power. He said the same thing whether he was speaking in one moment to Pilate, in the next moment he was speaking to disease, in the next moment he was speaking to sin, in the next moment he was speaking to lack. And always thou couldst have no power. What did hinder you? Pick up thy bed and walk. Thou couldst have no power. In other words, the carnal does not have the law of God to sustain it. It does not have the law of the infinite to sustain it. And as long as I do not fight evil, but merely know this truth, be consciously aware of the fact that all of these subliminal perceptions, subliminal hypnotisms, are not power. They cannot be power. We have all witnessed the power of hypnotism in an individual who permits themselves to be hypnotized, and we have all witnessed the powerlessness of hypnotism in those who refuse to permit themselves to be hypnotized, showing that it isn't hypnotism that is the power, it's our acceptance of it that gives it its power. And so it is that it is not money here in any sum that has the power to tempt me. The power has to be a subliminal thing within myself to which I must respond. As long as I am abiding in the truth that which is not of God is not power, that which is not of the infinite, of the divine, is not power, and that I myself am one with the infinite. I and my Father are one. All that the Father hath is mine. Now I am lifting myself above the subliminal. Now I am lifting myself above the hypnotism of the senses and knowing the truth. I and my Father are one. All that the Father has, and nothing except that which is of the Father is mine. No weapon that is formed against thee shall prosper. You see, the world has been repeating this and succumbing to evil at the same time, not knowing that the statement was addressed to a thee, a certain thee, the thee that dwelleth in the secret place of the Most High. That is the one to whom no evil comes nigh their dwelling place. That is the one against whom no weapon that is formed cannot. The one who dwells in the conscious realization of I and my Father are one. I am an inlet to and an outlet for the infinite, the divine, and none of these universal so-called laws are laws. Therefore, they are not operative in me, on me, or through me. Do you see that it is just as much an activity of an individual to make himself free of this universal carnal mind and to make himself consciously one with the infinite, as it is for an individual to decide to be a success in life in whatever his field may be. Unfortunately, at the present time, and it's only a temporary situation, our children are misled by the false teachings of psychology that would have you believe that if they're born in the ghetto, they're doomed. There's just no hope for them. Well, that's that. That's where they came from, and they're influenced by that, and so forth and so on. It isn't true now any more than it ever has been true, because there never has been a time in the history of the world where individuals who had it within themselves to succeed didn't succeed. And that was true in every land. True in some countries, fewer, because it took more to accomplish it. In this land, it's never been difficult for anybody that was imbued with the desire to make good. There's always been the outlet there, and it didn't make any difference whether he was born on the wrong side of the track or brought up there or what his youthful influences were. There is always something in a man to make him rise. And there we come back again to the angel, to the Menahuni, to the Christ. Call it what you will. Every one of us has a something within us that enables us to rise above the limitations of our humanhood. It does take recognition of it, for one thing. Sometimes it takes stick-to-itiveness. Even after we've learned it, we don't fight hard enough to maintain it. But the fact of the matter is that we all have that spirit in us. The major point that must be known is the word recognition. You must sometime or other recognize that there is this something within you, something not only greater than your human limitations, but something great enough to lift you out of and above human limitations, and then learn to rely on it, learn to listen to it, learn to give it room in your consciousness to operate and to function. Thou wilt keep him in perfect peace whose mind is stayed on thee. Thee. It doesn't make any difference what kind of a thee you have in mind, as long as you are realizing it to be something of a nature beyond your humanhood, something greater than your human capacities or limitations. Next is the ability to keep the mind stayed on it. Recognize it first, then acknowledge it. Acknowledge him in all thy ways, and then keep the mind stayed on it. Hold fast to the fact that there is something operating in my consciousness to bring me to my destiny. I'm not trying to outline what my destiny is. I haven't set a specific goal in the sense of I want this job or this business, but I have set the goal of attaining whatever it is that my destiny is. To me, of course, it is clear, and I hope in your moments of contemplative meditation you'll think about this. An infinite intelligence could not have created this marvelous universe without having created us greater than the universe, and for some purpose greater than the fish in the sea or the birds in the air or the cattle on 1,000 hills or the crops in the ground, because we were given dominion over all of this. Therefore, there must be locked up in us a destiny. The creative intelligence must have ordained us to some specific purpose of its own. Actually, as you witness the nature of creation, you'll see that the nature of the creative power is not only intelligence but love. And just as you notice how it brings the birds north and south in their seasons, just as it grows heavy fur on animals in heavy winters and light fur in light winters, so you'll notice that the nature of it is intelligence and love. Now, the human race has not been subject to that. It has not been the recipient of that intelligence or that love. And that is why for these 6,000-7,000 years of recorded history, that man has lived not under the law of God, not by the law of God, not under the protective instinct of a God, but rather has lived more or less an animal life. More in the beginning, a little bit less now. You might almost say not an animal life, but a beastly life, creaturely life, because it's been a matter of dog eat dog. It's a man eat animal, and one animal eat another animal, and so on down the line. But the reason for this is somewhere, somehow, the grandfather of Parzival became the son. The pure man became the impure. The Son of God became the prodigal. The immortal became the mortal. The Adam of the Garden of Eden became the Adam of outside the Garden of Eden. There is no use of trying to pinpoint when it happened, where it happened, or even how. The point is, it did. And we, as a human race, have strayed from our Father's house. We have left the Garden of Eden, and we have come under the statement of Paul's that the creature, the natural man, is not under the law of God, and neither indeed can be. And so it has been that we have lived for all of these centuries on our own wits, by our own powers, misusing them more than we have been using them. And that now we are coming to the apprehension, to the understanding of the fact that we can return to the Father's house by a specific way. First, there must be the recognition that our humanhood has been the direct result of this subliminal action of the universal human mind. That which in our work we call hypnotism, mesmerism, suggestion, malpractice. Not as if from one individual to another, but out of this universal carnal mind. Once we have recognized that, and the fact that there never was a need for it, that which we have accepted as law was no more law than some of these medical theories that have been exploded, then we can go on to the next step and realize, what we didn't know was I and my Father are one. We thought we were a man of earth, somehow separate and apart from God, somehow lost, strayed, or stolen, and not knowing how to get back. But now we know I and the Father are one. I have merely lost my way because I have lost my identity. I haven't consciously known who I am, what I am, and even where I am. I and my Father are one. I live and move and have my being in that infinite divine consciousness. I am under the law of infinite good. I am subject only to the influence of this infinite, and there is this Christ, Spirit of God, Menahuni, any other name you like. There is this in my consciousness. Goes before me to make the crooked places straight, walks beside me as God, hovers over me as an angel. Of it, the Master said, I am the bread, the wine, and the water. I am come that ye might have life, and that ye might have life more abundant. I will never leave thee nor forsake thee. So, if only you remember to give it the name I, and then realize whether you mount up to heaven in happiness today, or whether you go down to hell in unhappiness tomorrow, or walk through the valley of the shadow of death the day after, I am with thee, and I will never leave thee. I will be with thee unto the end of the world. And recognize the fact that the secret name of this presence is I. And let that I be the all in all, and then throughout the day and night go about your business, performing that which is given you to do, always recognizing that in addition to your own efforts, there is this presence working in you, with you, and through you. I, in the midst of thee, am mighty. Thank you.